Panthers and the Heat, both in action tonight. Of course, the Miami Marlins, they lost another one, 7-0 to the Cardinals. They open up a weekend series with the Mets this afternoon at 1:10. Nick Neidert or Paul Campbell are scheduled to get the start. Kevin Durant made a perfect return last night, going 5 for 5 from the field, scoring 17 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists in 19 minutes as the Nets routed the Pelicans 139-111. On the eve of the Masters, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office has said excessive speed was the cause of Tiger Woods' February crash. Woods' SUV was traveling between 84 and 87 miles per hour in a 45 mile per hour speed limit. The SUV was going 75 miles per hour. When it hit the tree, no traffic citations were issued. In men's college basketball news, University of Arizona has fired head coach Sean Miller after 12 seasons. In MMA news, Mighty Mouse Demetrius Johnson, he was knocked out in the second round by Adriano Moraz in one championship bout. And finally, sources say Justin Fields will get his second pro day, and this time the 49ers will be there. The Niners went to see Mac Jones the last time the two were scheduled on the same pro day in late March. This is South Florida's home for local sports talk. This is OnsideRadio.com.
Time for the hardcore basketball talk you crave. OnsideRadio.com presents Inside the Paint with Ethan Skolnick and Ira Winderman. To reach out to the guys, dial 888-441-4623. It's a flagrant foul if you're driving. Be safe, basketball fans. 844-416-8123. That's 844-416-8123. There's more to this game than just the score. So let's go inside the paint with two of the best in the business, Ethan Skolnick and Ira Winderman.
He's new at this, folks.
Which one do you want me to take? Look at that. This one, the 4-1. Look at that. We're back on Onside Radio on one of the three microphones. I'm Ethan Skolnick. Follow me on Sports at Ethan J. Skolnick. I'm here with Ira Winderman. You can follow him at Ira Heatbeat and, of course, at the Sun Sentinel. Inside the Paint is now brought to you by Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. The phone number is 305-424-8547. Pallet Rack City is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. Again, the phone number is 305-424-8547. That's Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. We appreciate them sponsoring Inside the Paint. Starting next week, we will be going to a full hour on Mondays, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. So this is our last Thursday edition, our last 30-minute edition. By then, we'll have a little better sense of this team. Of course, we'll also be a little bit more tired because they're going to be going out on the West Coast.
Yes, so he figures our first 10 a.m. show on a Monday comes after a 10 p.m. game in Portland. And that's why I was saying, Ethan, all along that Tuesday was so important and tonight is so important for that reason, because this schedule gets tough in a hurry. Because, you have the Lakers coming in tonight with no one. Matter of fact, if they didn't have the name the Lakers, you would think you were playing the Cavaliers based on the roster they have. We know there's no LeBron. We know there's no Anthony Davis, for what it's worth. Jared Dudley is out also. So you're playing a team that is marginal at best, probably worse than the Grizzlies team that he lost to on Tuesday. But then you go to Portland on Sunday. Let's face it, you're an underdog there. We don't know by how
Top
much.
3 MVP candidate.
But you're clearly an underdog. Then you go to Phoenix. Well, we saw Phoenix last night against Utah. They are legitimate. They are a legitimate contender, even in the loaded West. Then, as always, and you were on the beat for a long time traveling, and you know this, Ethan, why do the Heat always play the Denver Nuggets on the second night of a back-to-back? All right.
Schedule a loss.
You're at altitude, you have that. Then you go to Minnesota. Now, again, that's the winnable game on the trip, but you're also on the road for a full week. Then you come back to American Airlines Arena, whatever it's going to be called by then, and you're playing the Nets at least with Durant and Kyrie, and that's at about the end of the 10 days for James Harden being out. You've got to build some sort of equity in your record right now. And I'm curious, as we go to the full-hour show starting on Monday, is this really just a 500 team?
We were talking about that on 5 on the Floor, and my question to my guys was a team that can't build any consistency tends to settle at the 500 mark. That's where it is, and we pretty much pose the same question. And of course, what gets brought up is, well, they had that run with Jimmy where they won like 12 of 13,
11 of 12,
11 of
right.
12, where they were playing at a really high level, and then things sort of bottomed out again. And I think even as we look to last year when they started to incorporate new players, remember, it didn't work right away. Like, they went on the West Coast after that. Crowder,
they were a 500 team with the new guys last year.
They were not playing all that well, and they really needed the COVID break to get out of it. This season has felt a lot like the way they've played prior to the COVID break. Like, it's a little different in the sense that they've been better defensively than offensively, but also it's that choppiness we saw before the COVID break last year. And I think there was an overreaction the other night to the Memphis game in this sense, okay? This has been a good defensive team, okay? Like, whatever you want to say about certain nights and whatever and other random scrub heat killers, as we call them, and there probably are a lot of them on the Lakers tonight, getting off against them, okay? And in this one, you have a guard go for 23 in the third quarter that's just twice his average, okay?
Right, Dylan
the
Brooks.
Malik Monks of the world, the others that have gone off against them. But even as that's happened, defensively, they're still 7th in the league in defensive efficiency. My question is this going to be a good offensive team? Now, I think we've seen some signs with Hero and Robinson lately, but I still don't see it consistently enough. And it feels like when you've covered a lot of these teams that sort of settle out closer to 500, obviously most Heat teams have been better than that. This feels like a team that when the defense is good, the offense is not. When the offense is good, the defense is not. They have not really been able to put it together for a sustained stretch this season.
And that's the thing, when you have so many one-way players, you're picking and choosing, aren't you, Ethan? So when you look at this team, Jimmy's a two-way player, Bam's a two-way player, and that might be it on this roster.
Yeah.
Trevor Ariza really helps the defense, but he's been just, on and off. Victor Oladipo, to this point, has been much more of a defensive presence, such as shaky. He almost brings the offense back a little. So it's as much as we posed after the trading deadline and everyone came together, wow, the Heat can put together this all-defensive lineup. They could throw Bam out there and Ariza out there and Iguodala out there and Jimmy Butler out there and Victor Oladipo out there and not have any 3-1 shooting. So you wind up with that. So you're making your choices. Then we've said last year when they were offensive a-go-go, you could throw Hero out there and Dragic out there and Duncan Robinson out there and get your offense going. So it's been so pick and choose. So that's sort of the real problem there, is that you have to make a choice on how you're going to approach it. Eric Spoelstra has to find the happy medium. We know the Heat will always side on defense. That's who they are. That's who the motto is. But on nights like the other night, where the guys on the other team are going to hit shots, you realize you're going to have to outscore someone sometime. And the whole thing is, Ethan, if you're building to win the Eastern Conference, and if you truly believe you're a contender, what's the one team definitively in the East you have to get past?
The Nets.
How few points can you score and win a game? And I'm actually asking that. I'm not saying sorry.
I mean, I think 110 is kind of the barometer.
The absolute minimum, I think. I mean, that's a 130-point-a-game team when they have it rolling. So that's the concern right now, is which lineup choices does Eric make? And the other point is, besides Duncan Robinson, is there a consistent three-point shooter on this team?
No, there's not, and I want to cycle back to that. But one thing that stuck out to me the other night is you mentioned their defensive lineup. They had their defensive lineup on the floor when Memphis was going off. Okay, so that was the other thing that was a little bit concerning. But there's two guys in particular I want to get to, and you mentioned both of them in passing. Is this all we can expect from Goran Dragic the rest of the season? Because there's no explosiveness there.
Correct.
And is this all we can really expect from Victor Oladipo? We talk about rhythm. But in his state, which is he's still not a completely healthy player, and he hasn't been offensively, at least. It's a little odd to me that he can defend.
Well, he put up some big numbers in Houston offensively, though. He's averaging around 20.
But he was a looter in a riot. He was a looter in a riot to a certain degree.
And so the thing I would say about that is Goran is going to give you that one spurt. I think he has one spurt left. Last year, the spurt came in the playoffs when he was a different player. But that was also after a 4-month rest.
Yes.
Again, last season's so different. The whole fluke narrative, thankfully we moved past that. But it was a most unique season where the Heat had an older roster and everyone got 4 months off. I know they got away from training, but they came back somewhat refreshed. So they have to find a way to get Goran refreshed again. And if that is giving him some time off, if that is a lesser role, the problem is they don't have a point guard on the roster. We've spoken about this.
Yeah.
We know they're going with Dwayne Dedmon now. That's how they're filling the extra roster spot for now. But when you look at this team, and especially when you sit up there at the arena and you see the entirety of the offense, this team can say Jimmy's a playmaker, and he is.
Yes, and
you
Bam.
can say Bam's a playmaker, and he had 10 assists the other day. You could say Vic's a playmaker and he's run point guard. He has advanced the ball across midcourt more than any other player when he's
Chris
been on the
Paul.
court. But he's not a true point guard.
Right,
so
right.
except for Goran, you still have that issue of, is there someone who, when they get on the court and they check into the scorer's table and they go out on the court, they say to themselves, my ultimate goal is to get this offense running and to sort of be the quarterback out there versus getting my own also.
But it seems to me like at this stage, and again, I'm a Goran stan, but at this stage, it seems to me that's pretty much all he can do. That and some step-back jumpers at times. There is no ability right now to turn the corner for him. And you mentioned it. He had the break last year. But now, not only did he have less of a break, not only is there less of a routine, but he was also coming off the injury, which perhaps he came back from a little bit too soon. And there's no rhythm developed. And I know that people want to see rhythm develop between him and Oladipo and try. But I feel at this stage, like, why not just 2 weeks? 2 weeks. Kendrick, 2 weeks. Is there something wrong with Kendrick Nunn that they're not reporting? Because he's not on an injury report anymore.
He's not on the injury report. He is available. Those of us who hear from certain people close to Kendrick, are pointing that out also, which of course leads me to believe, therefore, he's not injured.
Yes.
Because you wouldn't be promoting your player if he was injured. It's simple, Ethan. They have 5-6 wings who are ahead of him, and you can't debate that. You wouldn't say he's ahead of Jimmy, he's ahead of Duncan, he's ahead of Vic right now. What you're trying to do, they're trying to work towards something. So I think that's who Kendrick Nunn is.
But is he
He's
ahead
your
of
utility player.
is he ahead of what seems like a weary Goran Dragic? That's my question.
And so I'm wondering now, come the West Coast trip and the back-to-back we mentioned, does Eric start doing that? We saw Goran just sit for one game against the Warriors, second night of a back-to-back last week. Then we saw Andre Iguodala sit just for one game when there didn't seem to be an injury before, didn't seem to be an injury after. So I think Eric is going to protect his 30-somethings. I asked him the question the other day at practice about load management, and he tap danced back from that word. He says, we don't do that. But they do that. They just call it a different name.
They did it with Dwayne Wade for 2 years.
I mean, but they also, at the time, especially for some of those years when they had better talent, it was easier to do. I do think they have to decide with Goran what it's going to take. Hopefully it's not a procedure or something like that, but back spasms, any of us who've gotten older know how bad and debilitating those can be. But you can't keep working with an 11-man rotation. So if you're bringing Kendrick Nunn back, as you mentioned, then you're probably going to have to sit someone or alternate someone out on different games. Today, Trevor doesn't play. Tomorrow, Andre doesn't play. The day after, Goran doesn't play, or do something like that. But again, you're also trying to develop continuity. So you have sort of the yin and the yang thing going on there. That's why you're 500.
I mean, I think we know what their 9-man rotation is going to look like in the postseason. But as you said, the question is how you get there. And that's why, I mean, I would be fine with just, like I said, either Goran's going to play every other game. I don't think he's going to play back-to-backs for sure. But maybe just resting him a little bit more because it's at the point now where it's not even like he's providing value because, again, defensively he's a liability. So if he can't turn the corner on offense and create, you don't even see the stuff from him right now, like where he turns the corner and then there's the lob to Bam. Like there's none of that going on. The only thing you're really seeing from Goran right now is he'll occasionally get on a step back run, which
and
he
the
did
three-pointers.
And that's it.
And you need that to a degree also,
Yes.
like we said, because Tyler's coming around a little now, but you need the three-point shooting. Kendrick's up and down about that also. So, yeah, it's crazy, Ethan. We are in mid-April, and there's still a work in progress. At least last year they knew that Kendrick Nunn and Myers Leonard would be the regular season placeholders, and they had a goal going forward of a different rotation. It's crazy. We're in mid-April. I still don't know who the Miami Heat are.
All right, we're going to talk about Dedmon and kind of how that may affect the big man rotation. I also want to talk about Precious and maybe if a mistake was made there. Inside the Paint, sponsored by Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. Right back here on Onside Radio.
Onside Radio, the only choice for the South Florida sports fan.
Let's raise a cup to the first among us who put themselves last. To the risk takers, the mask makers, the heroes on the front line and online. To the ones keeping shelves full and keeping us hopeful. To those who don't stop and those making all the stops. To the ones who pick up, suit up, and never let us down. From all of us at Duncan to all the heroes keeping everyone running, we thank you.
You can't buy a best friend. You can love them, walk them, pet them, and care for them, whether they want you to or not. You can take a picture or 50. You can fly to the moon, travel the world. or just stay in bed. You can't buy a best friend like that, but you can adopt one. There are millions of pets waiting for a best friend just like you. Help us save them all at bestfriends.org.
Hey Panthers fans, Dave Dwork here with some awesome news. Every Saturday, I'm going to bring you the latest on everything to do with the Florida Panthers with Chirping the Cats Radio. Saturday mornings from 10 to 11 a.m., we'll dive into the state of the team, recap games, and hear from past and present Panthers players, and plenty of other great hockey guests too. Got questions about the Panthers? Call or text the show and we'll break it down. Don't miss Chirping the Cats Radio, Saturday mornings from 10 to 11 a.m. only on OnsideRadio.com.
Let's be honest. The National Symphony may not be in his future, but he wanted to try violin. So you said yes because you love him. And if you love him that much, love him enough to make sure he's buckled up and in the back seat. Find out more about keeping your kids safe in your vehicle at nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat. Show him you love him. Keep him safe. Visit nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Hey, it's Big O. You know, air quality in your home or business is so important now, folks. That's why you've got to call M&S Air Conditioning. Let them install high-efficiency polarized air filter in your AC unit that attracts, captures, and destroys biological contaminants to improve your air quality. M&S is always on call from 7:30 a.m. till 9 o'clock p.m. and, of course, emergency Sundays. Call for more info on high-efficiency air filters and their preventative maintenance plans. Visit M&S Air Conditioning at ac-florida.com.
Time for the hardcore basketball talk you crave. OnsideRadio.com presents Inside the Paint with Ethan Skolnick and Ira Winderman. To reach out to the guys, dial 888-441-4623. It's a flagrant foul if you're driving. Be safe, basketball fans. 844-416-8123. That's 844-416-8123. There's more to this game than just the score. So let's go inside the paint with two of the best in the business, Ethan Skolnick and Ira Winderman.
All right, Ethan Skolnick back on Inside the Paint here on a Thursday, but starting next week, we will be every Monday from 10 to 11. We may even take calls, Ira and I, Ira Heatbeat. You can follow him on Twitter, Ethan J. Skolnick, 5 Reasons Sports. All right, let's get to the big man situation. We were talking about this. They have to officially announce a player today. They got to add a player to the roster.
14th player on the roster. By NBA rule, you can go below 14 only for 2 weeks max. Today is the 2-week anniversary of the trading deadline. When they send more players out than they brought back in. So there physically must be a player on the Heat roster at tip-off tonight to be player number 14.
And we have assumed, because of the reporting, because we knew they were working out with him, they were interested in, that's going to be Dwayne Dedmon. Dwayne Dedmon, a player who they had in Summer League in 2013. This always dates me because I remember actually sitting there at a desk with Eric in Orlando watching Dwayne Dedmon and him talking about his various attributes. And now 8 years later, Dwayne Dedmon with them. What do you reasonably expect for a role for him, provided, again, this guy's had major ankle problems over the years, provided that he is somewhat healthy?
The one thing we've always seen with Eric Spoelstra is he likes to try out his new toys. So that even if someone isn't going to be a rotation player or maybe play at all, he wants to get a look at him to see the possibilities. I think we're going through that right now with Nemanja. I'm not so sure he's a rotation player, but Eric has to find out sooner rather than later in a playoff moment if he could defend the post, if he could play their defensive style, if he could work offensively. So I think Dwayne Dedmon will get a run in some situations. Bam will miss a game along the way. It just happens today with everything that's going on anyway. That'll be the Dwayne Dedmon game. The one thing we know about Eric Spoelstra when it comes to his rotation, he doesn't like to adjust everything. So he will take his 13th man and put him in the starting lineup for a game or two just to keep everything else in order. So I think, as crazy as it sounds, I think Dwayne Dedmon will even start a game for the Miami Heat at some point just to keep the continuity. I don't think you want to bring Precious in, we'll talk about him in a second, and get his confidence up of, oh, it's finally happening. I'm starting, I'm getting my chance. I think he wants to leave everyone in their own place. I was surprised that it's not a 10-day contract and the Heat aren't giving themselves future options. I didn't think Dwayne Dedmon would have that kind of sort of clout to get the rest of the season, but I think Dwayne, and you can address this because of his situation, either wanted to be all in or all out. He didn't want to come back and go through everything for 10 days if he wasn't sure he wanted to play the balance of the season. So I think that's the compromise. Because of this deal, the Heat cannot sign their 15th player till about 3 weeks are left in the season. That'll be the remainder of their day-by-day salary under the luxury tax, not to go into the tax. There will be a 15th man also.
And you mentioned that there are some players that have been released here and might have been options. Kem Birch, one player who played for the Miami Heat briefly or was with them in camp. And has carved out a pretty decent career for himself in Orlando. He's actually a guy that we were monitoring a little bit. Yeah, Dedmon has some family situation that we thought maybe he might take off the rest of the year. So you might be right. He might have basically said, "Well, it's either or. I'm not going to come back for a 10-day, so I'll actually let this thing play out." But let's talk about Precious a little bit, because the reality is that if Precious had sort of continued improving, it had been going upwards this whole year, this probably wouldn't even have been necessary, or might not have been as necessary, right?
No, I was going to disagree with you for this reason. I think even as Precious was trending in the right way, it was obvious by his physical stature he was a power forward.
Right.
And the thing they liked about Kelly Olynyk is he could play 5 and defend 5s. I'm not so sure that Precious ever will be cast as a center. Matter of fact, when I go back and I look at the Heat's official roster they submit to the NBA, they have him only listed as a forward.
Right.
So I think some of us were making the assumption in today's undersized NBA, you could get away with Precious Achiuwa at center. Bam's a freak. Bam is different. Bam makes up for his lack of bulk and his lack of height with his quickness, with his athleticism, with his intelligence.
Right.
He's very unique in that aspect. So I think you're looking more as him as a career power forward. Now, look, a guy like John Collins also plays some center, but he's not a center.
Right.
He's a skinny bean kind of guy who, is a power forward. So I think even if Precious reaches his ultimate upside, it's not going to necessarily be positionally that would be optimal for the Heat.
It's interesting that you mentioned Bam's intelligence, and not to disparage Precious in any way, but obviously this is a kid who didn't have Summer League. We've talked about it. Didn't even have an NCAA tournament. Didn't have a conference tournament. So he's just thrown into the fire here, basically. And it just looks to me at times like he's playing too fast. Like he just needs to slow down, because it went from a situation where I thought he had tremendous hands for like the first 2 weeks, and now he's got Joel Anthony hands, and it's just completely downward spiral in that regard. With that said, I think part of what happened here was we underrated Bam. Like this idea that came out after the draft, well, they found Bam 2.0.
Right.
There may never be a Bam 2.0. I mean, that might be the reality of this.
A one of a kind.
He is one of a kind. And that's why that list, and I know people were trying to get everybody talking. And look, I respect Bobby Marks and Kevin Pelton a lot. So I mean, they weren't hacks that they threw on that ESPN list. But that's why I objected to Bam's placement on that list on the 25 under 25, and they had him 9th. Because to me, I don't think a lot of general managers would trade Bam for some of the pieces above him on that list. And the reason is you can find, as great as Donovan Mitchell is, there are other Donovan Mitchell-like players who might come in, right?
It's like running backs in the NFL.
Correct.
You can find a scorer.
A 3-level scorer. Look, are they valuable? Abso-freaking-lutely, okay? Are they the ones that get the headlines? Yes. But it is harder to find a Bam, I think. A unicorn, than to find a Donovan Mitchell, which is why I would have had him higher. I would have had him higher than Simmons, frankly, also, okay? But I think sometimes because we want Bam to do more of what we think he's capable of, we underrate what it is he's actually doing, which is pretty much everything every night, largely with his intelligence.
Motion on both sides of the court. It would wear a mere mortal down. The way the energy he puts in on defense is the kind of energy. There's the great story in the Utah Jazz. Adrian Dantley was playing with Karl Malone, and he basically told him, you got to stop diving on the floor. You got to stop working so hard on defense. You want to protect your career and not get injured. That's how a lot of NBA players think. Instead, Bam is giving it his all on both ends. His movement on defense, you've seen this. You posted the videos. Cooper Moorhead posted the videos. His constant movement, I think, might be unmatched in the NBA right now with what he does. But getting back to Precious and what he is or isn't, I think there's a part 2 of that. The first half of the season, of an NBA season, is about feeling things out and fitting in. The second half of an NBA season is go time. So, in the first half of the season, I think he was getting the easier passes to catch. They were making it easy for him. The ones he's fumbling now are the intricate pocket passes, especially from Jimmy Butler, where he's, maybe 3 feet away from him. We talk about this in the NFL, how you can't throw a dart, 3 feet from someone. It bounces off the top of your hands. It's an interception. But the great NBA big men with the great hands, they catch those. That's what Precious is fumbling away. That's why he's been moved out of the rotation. Because at the moments of truth, He's not the player you need for a playoff team right now, and that's a concern because Nemanja defensively is a question mark. Trevor offensively is a question mark. You found that lightning in a bottle last year with Jay Crowder, who did it on both ends. But that's why this Heat is 500, because I think when we go through with their 9-man rotation, 4 question marks in there.
We do. And I think, like I said, the only question marks that have been solved to a certain degree, and I'm not necessarily on the defensive end, although I think both guys have been much better lately, particularly Robinson. But with Robinson and Hero, I do think the one question mark that has been eliminated, and we can talk about if they have enough shooting, but at least their 2 guys who are supposed to be shooters have looked like shooters, particularly Robinson. I'll go to this with you on Hero, though. It's been an upward trend since the trade deadline.
Yes.
Okay, do you think that's psychological? I mean, we're not in his head, but
I always disagree with that because I always assume professionals are professionals, and the Heat are really good about keeping their players grounded. So
but he's 21.
But not only that, but this internet make anything a story, and some people who run websites and other things and want traffic and go with it. I mean, to me, it's just like, that's like you saying, well, now every Heat player was worried because Kawhi Leonard's coming in next.
Right.
So I think you have to go to your players and say, hey, buddy, this is a different time, like no other time. Eric Spoelstra addressed that with us, and you have to ground your players. But I got to tell you, if you're the kind of player that's going to get flustered by that, then you're going to have a problem every single offseason and every single mid-February when the trading deadline goes back to its typical place also. So if they did get flustered, you better step up to them and saying you got to move past this.
But what do you think it is, though? I mean, there is a clear line of demarcation where all of a sudden Duncan Robinson is now a 45% shooter from 3 again, and Tyler Hero is averaging 18, 5, and 5 on good efficiency. Like, what happened then? I mean, there's something structural?
Yeah, I think is that the Heat finally found their offense and what they are with this reason. Where are the Heat in pace right now? Where are they ranked in the NBA?
They were last.
Last, 30th. You remember the great Pat Riley quote when they were making turnovers and he was coaching, and he said, I will bring this thing to a halt if I have to.
Right.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
They brought it to a halt. This Heat team is a great half-court defensive team when they're settled. They're a very good half-court offensive team when they get into their quote-unquote stuff. Their dribble handoffs, their constant moving and all that kind of stuff. So they've slowed the game down. And if you go back and watch that Grizzlies game, when they got sped up by Memphis, that's when they got in trouble. So I think Duncan Robinson needs to work his shots in the half-court. Tyler Hero, for as much as he's energy, boy wonder and all that, works very well late clock situations in the half-court. So I think by the old Pat Riley, we will bring this thing to a halt. I think that's what they did. They slowed the season down for their players. Now we're going to see the balance of the season. Will opponents be able to speed them up? Controlling the pace, sort of like in football, possession time will mean everything for the Heat on both ends of the court.
It reminds me of the 2015 finals where LeBron basically told me that in locker. He said, we need to limit possessions. He was without Kyrie, he was without Kevin Love, and his thing was, it's the same. I know that this one probably resonates with you. It's the Bills-Giants Super Bowl. It's Parcells when they were going against the K-Gun offense, and they just decided, Otis Anderson, we're going to grind this thing to a halt, and they won on a missed field goal. And that's essentially right. I think that is a lot what's going on here. All right, this is the last half-hour show for a while of Inside the Paint. We'll be back on Monday at 10 a.m. for a full hour. So join us there. Kai will be back next. Thanks to Pallet Rack City and Hialeah. Again, 305-424-8547.
This has been Inside the Paint with Ethan Skolnick and Ira Winderman, exclusively at OnSideRadio.com.